morning. His followers call him Kundur, which means the presence.
Tibetans really revere this man as someone who can see things perhaps more clearly than most of us can, and who sees the interest of the country as a whole.
But Chinese leaders have an opposite view, calling him a wolf in monk's clothes and a sinister separatist, charging he's trying to drive the Chinese from Tibet. This 14th Dalai Lama was born in 1935 to peasants in a remote Tibetan village. His parents named their fifth of 16 children Lama Dondrup. When Lama was 2, his typical childhood took an unexpected turn. Monks who were searching for the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama visited his home and anointed him heir apparent.
It means that you've been recognized as a young child as being the reincarnation of 400 years of the leading Tibetan Lama.
The monks took the 2-year-old to the Potala Palace in Lhasa, and under the watchful eyes of elders, he went through intensive religious training. Lama was also schooled in foreign relations and philosophy.
You have this role as a religious teacher, and at the same time you have to take on the responsibility of being the head of state, the leader of the Tibetan polity. And you're also a monk. You have these very strict responsibilities as a monk and as a teacher of Buddhist philosophy. So a whole range of jobs, of responsibilities that come onto your shoulders if you're a Dalai Lama.
At only 5, Lama was enthroned as the 14th Dalai Lama and renamed Tenzin Gyatso. 10 years later, he also became Tibet's head of state. But that same year, China sent its troops into Tibet, claiming it was liberating this strategic and resource-rich region.
Tibetans have always felt themselves to be a different place, a separate country, and they were independent for 30 years or so. China wants to overlook that period of independence and to go back to the claim that Tibet has always been part of China.
In March 1959, Tibetans staged a mass revolt against Chinese rule, but their fight for independence was ruthlessly quashed. Fearing for their lives, the Dalai Lama and more than 80,000 of his followers fled over the Himalayan mountains into India. The exiled Dalai Lama called on his people to wage a non-violent campaign for self-rule in Tibet and appealed to China's leaders to consider the middle way, a solution where Tibet would govern its own internal affairs but not have full autonomy.
The whole world knows Dalai Lama not seeking independence. Our approach is not separation, but within the People's Republic of China, for full guarantee about our unique cultural heritage, including our language.
But the Chinese government ruled out the Dalai Lama's offer and instead labeled him a rebel who was masterminding Tibet's breakaway from China.
He tries to engage in secession every day. Ever since he was kicked out of the motherland, he has not stopped trying to encourage separation.
Since fleeing Tibet, the Dalai Lama has traveled extensively around the world, not only to spread his message of reconciliation, but to seek support for his homeland. For his efforts, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989.
There never was a Buddhist figure of this stature really in history before, and that's quite an achievement. On paper, Tibet was a small issue, a small region that China had never managed to assert its claim to, and it became a major issue in world politics, but partly because of the role and the presence of the Dalai Lama, generally steering people away from conflict towards issues of morality, issues of human rights, and the possibility of a peaceful resolution.
Earlier this year, Tibet was back in the headlines. Demonstrations, the largest in 2 decades, took place in Lhasa and other cities to mark the 1959 uprising against Chinese rule. Within days, the protests turned violent, with reports of Tibetans attacking Han Chinese buildings and homes, symbols of Chinese rule. Troops were rushed in to quash the demonstrations. Official reports claim at least 20 people were killed, while Tibetan groups put the number much higher. The Dalai Lama appealed to the protesters to stop the violence. He even threatened to resign.
If things become out of control, violent things become out of control, then my option, I resign.
But Chinese leaders brushed off his plea and blamed the Dalai Lama for the riots, claiming he incited the protests.
The plot of the Dalai clique is doomed to fail. Tibet will not be prevented from its development and progress by any power.
The Dalai Lama has always insisted that the only way to resolve the situation in Tibet is through dialogue with the Chinese, but the two sides have never directly met. Tibetans who revere the Dalai Lama call him Yishin Norbu, Tibetan for wish-fulfilling gem, a fitting name for a monk who carries so many of the hopes and expectations of people who long for a peaceful resolution in Tibet. But he says there may be a tough road ahead before that wish is granted.
If I die today, I think some setback for Tibetan people's struggle, that will happen. But eventually, this is one national struggle, one ancient nation with rich cultural heritage. Therefore, you see, Tibetan spirit will not go away with my death.